Again, welcome to How PubMed Works selection. Today's class is about what's in PubMed and how it gets there. My name is Catherine Staley from the National Library of Medicine's User Engagement Program. I'm here with my colleague Brittany Davis. We're joined by some panelists who will be helping to answer your questions. Christina Elliott is an NLM publisher liaison who works directly on the PMC and Medline selection processes. Erin Zellers is the PMC operations manager, and she manages the PMC production and operations team. And Amanda Sawyer is part of the NCBI PubMed team. Lauren Topper will be joining us a little bit later, and Lauren heads the team that manages the selection processes for Medline and PMC. So we're very lucky to have these experts with us today. Here is our agenda for today. We've already completed our pretest. Next, I will briefly review the contents of PubMed and how PubMed fits into the NLM collection. Then I'll survey the current publishing landscape to provide some context for the changes to PubMed over the last couple of decades. After that, we'll discuss the NLM's processes and policies for selecting PubMed content. And finally, I'll talk about evaluating articles and provide some resources that you can use to assist your patrons with locating high-quality journals. And then we'll close with our post-test. So to understand the contents of PubMed, we need to understand where PubMed fits into the larger NLM collection. On this slide, I have a diagram of concentric circles. These circles represent the sets of bibliographic records for journals in our NLM systems. The largest set is the NLM catalog. A smaller subset is the NLM journals collection, and a subset of that is PubMed journals. You may know that the NLM catalog provides online access to NLM bibliographic data for books, electronic materials, and most importantly for our topic today, journals. The NLM Journals collection consists of the journals that we collect the complete contents of, either starting with the first issue or at another point set by the NLM. The NLM catalog includes records for journals that are not selected for the NLM Journals collection, which is why the NLM catalog circle is larger than the NLM journals collection circle here. And we'll review why that is later in class. PubMed, our topic today, is the NLM's online journal citation database, and it represents the most visible subset of the NLM journal collection. So let's review the contents of PubMed. PubMed facilitates searching across 3 NLM products: Medline, PubMed Central or PMC, and the NCBI bookshelf. Medline is the largest component of PubMed, as represented by the big blue disk on this slide. Medline consists primarily of citations from journals indexed for it. It does not include the full text of those articles. However, links are often available to other sources with the full text, like publisher websites and PMC. Another component of PubMed is PMC, and today we'll discuss 3 different types of PMC content that appear in PubMed results, including archived journals, author manuscripts, and preprints. So first, PMC contains the full text for journals selected for the PMC collection. PMC also includes individual author manuscripts that are deposited in PMC to comply with public access policies. And currently ongoing is a preprints pilot that makes preprints of NIH-funded research available in PMC. All of their discs on the screen are a different shade of green because these 3 make up the contents of PMC, However, they have distinct selection processes and policies, which we'll review later. And additionally, PubMed includes records for chapters, reports, and books from the NCBI bookshelf, represented by the purple disc on top. Now, there is overlap between the contents of Medline, PMC, and Bookshelf because resources can be indexed or archived in more than one, which is why each part of the database on this slide is outlined in a dashed line. This class will cover the differences and the similarities between the processes and the policies that NLM has in place for each component of PubMed. So to review and to provide the answer to number 1 on your handout, you can search PubMed for journals indexed for Medline, journals archived in PMC, author manuscripts in PMC, preprints in PMC, and NCBI bookshelf contents. Now, PubMed exists within a complex publishing landscape, and I'm betting that most of you are very familiar with the complexities of publishing today. So my question for you is, what are some of the features that you observe and perhaps deal with in your work that relate to publishing and the publishing landscape? What are the trends or the changes that you're seeing? Let me know what you think in the chat. Carrie says, yeah, EPUB ahead of print. Connie says increase in open access model. We're definitely going to talk about open access today. Yeah, online only journal articles. Increase in predatory publishing. Great. These are great observations. Are there any other trends or changes or complexities in publishing that you see in your work? Maybe when you're helping faculty, researchers, students? Yes, someone says the use of AI. Yes, certainly wasn't an answer a couple years ago when we were teaching this class, but definitely is now. Great. Well, thank you for those observations. We're going to touch on a few of those topics today. So let me move us ahead to our next slide about the publishing landscape. So the 3 features of the publishing landscape that I want us to focus on today are the volume of publishing, the growth of open access, and public access policies. So we're going to break down each one of these. The first feature is the volume of publishing. Biomedical and life sciences research continue to outpace other fields in the number of articles produced. Therefore, those trying to index and archive this literature, like the NLM, are always trying to keep up. And in addition to an increase in the volume of publishing, journal publishing models have evolved over the last 2 decades, and we'll touch on 3 of those models today. First, the traditional subscription model, where the reader or a library pays a fee to access contents of a journal, is still quite common, but it is decreasing in dominance. Next, an open access model, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, means that the complete contents of a journal are made available under a Creative Commons or similar open access license for no charge. And finally, a hybrid model is where the full contents of a journal requires subscription access, but individual articles may be made available under an open access license. All of these models come into play when we talk about PubMed. The third feature of the publishing landscape that affects PubMed content is public access policies. So while open access typically describes a journal's publishing model, public access refers to funder or organizational policies that mandate authors make publicly funded research results freely available. The National Institutes of Health played a key role in the start of this movement in requiring researchers to make their results free to the public via public repositories like PMC. In August 2022, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy announced that federal-level departments and agencies are expected to update their public access policies by 2025 to make publications and research funded by taxpayers immediately available to the public. Sometimes organizations have open access policies that function very similarly to these public access policies. For example, a university might adopt an open access policy that encourages faculty to either publish in an open access journal or deposit their accepted papers into a university repository. These policies have made more and more articles freely available online through repositories like PMC. So I'm going to pause here because I'd like to get a sense of your experience with open access and public access policies. Give me a thumbs up if your institution has an open access or a public access policy. And you can find the thumbs up from that react button at the bottom of your screen. Yeah, I'm seeing some thumbs. I know those can be very popular at various institutions. I see Emily in the chat says, not here, but we're working on it. Yeah, excellent. Great. And my second question is, give me a thumbs up if you help researchers comply with open access or public access policy mandates, maybe by providing information or classes or personal assistance and consultations. Yeah, I'm seeing more thumbs. Excellent. So it sounds like quite a few of us are very familiar with these policies. Okay, so to help you review and to complete number 2 on your handout, the 3 features of the current publishing landscape that influence PubMed content, and I would like you to keep in mind today, include the volume of publishing, the growth of open access publishing models, and public access policies. All right, let's just check in on our agenda. So we just reviewed the contents of PubMed and how the ever-evolving publishing landscape affects it. So now we're ready to move into really the heart of this class, which is about NLM's processes and policies for selecting PubMed content. And we're going to start with the NLM collection development guidelines. Let me draw your attention to question number 3 on your handout. Question 3 asks, where does the NLM provide a transparent and publicly accessible set of criteria that we use in reviewing and evaluating the many journals that come to NLM? And the answer is the NLM Collection Development Guidelines. A link to those guidelines is at the bottom of your handout if you want to read the full text. The guidelines include a journal selection policy that applies to Medline, PMC on the journal level, and Bookshelf. NLM uses these criteria to select the journals we acquire, preserve, and make accessible to NLM users. First, the collection development guidelines include guidance for the specific types of science that fall within the collection scope, including what NLM considers biomedicine, healthcare, and many areas of the life sciences. Next, we'll review the main components of the NLM journal selection policy as outlined in the collection development guidelines. This slide covers a lot of important information, so I'm going to go through it slowly. First, we evaluate the journal's publication operations to ensure that it has an ISSN and a title, is formatted as a collection of articles, and demonstrates regular publishing. Additionally, the selection policy states that journals should publish specific types of content, like original research, reviews, case reports, or data. Next, through its policies and processes, a journal should demonstrate good editorial quality, evidence of scientific rigor, editorial independence from the sponsor when commercial funding is received, diversity in authorship of articles, including a low proportion of articles authored by editors and editorial board members, and elements that follow best practices for the objectivity, credibility, and scientific quality of its content, such as well-defined methods for selecting articles, a transparent peer review process, author and editor conflicts of interest policies, and other ethical policies, as well as article-level statements indicating adherence to these policies. On the screen, I've made that box look different than the others because it's a really important point that I want you to remember. And finally, NLM also expects journals to conform with the guidelines and best practices promoted by professional scholarly publishing organizations. These organizations include the Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, ICMJE, the Council of Science Editors, CSE, and other groups like NISO. This is a good time to point out that your handout includes a table with the many acronyms that I'll use in class today, so that can be a handy reference during the class and after for all of those acronyms. So for those of you who are librarians, give me a thumbs up if you have a similar journal selection policy statement for your library collection. I'm betting that many of you do. Excellent. Thank you. Seeing lots of thumbs. I'm sure some of this sounded very familiar to what your own institutions do. Okay. In addition to reviewing the individual journal, NLM staff review publishers that are new to NLM to determine whether the publisher is eligible to have their journals in the NLM collection. First, NLM will only consider an application from an organization that has been publishing scholarly content for a minimum of 2 years. And that's the answer to number 4 on your handout, 2 years. We look to see that the publishers follow guidelines and best practices from professional organizations, including the ICMJE's recommendations for the conduct, reporting, editing, and publication of scholarly work in medical journals, and a joint statement by COPE, DOAJ, WAME, and OASPA titled Principles of Transparency and Best Practices in Scholarly Publishing. Both of those reports are linked on your handout if you want to read them further. We also look for accurate information, evidence that the publisher knows how to operate a journal, and evidence that journal content is actively maintained. If they don't pass this review, the journal may reapply after a period of time. Some publishers may make misleading claims or engage in other fraudulent practices. Others simply lack the knowledge or the resources to produce a scientific journal of the quality required for Medline or PMC. Okay, I just gave you a lot of information. Let's stop for a moment and review a few key points about how we evaluate journals. In describing NLM's journal selection policies, I mentioned that we look for articles with good editorial quality, evidence of scientific rigor, and elements that contribute to the objectivity, credibility, and scientific quality of its content. And then I mentioned some specific things we look for that align with industry best practices. So my question for you is, and this is also number 5 on your handout, what are some of the specific best practices NLM looks for to gauge whether a journal meets the selection policy? So think about it if you can remember one and put it in the chat if you do, and then we'll review together. Yes, Andrea says transparent peer review process. Excellent. That is definitely one of them. Anyone else remember one of the other two? Nita, yeah, 2 years of publishing is something that we look for with our publishers. They have to be publishing for at least 2 years. Maud says editors, we do look at author and editor conflicts of interest policies. Yeah, I see a couple folks have put that in the chat now. Excellent. Okay, thank you for those answers in the chat. Let's review the answers together. So on the screen in the solid orange box are some of the best practices that NLM looks for in a journal to gauge the objectivity, credibility, and scientific quality of journal content. And I think we found 2 out of 3 in the chat, but I may have missed the third one. So those are well-defined methods for selecting articles, a transparent peer review process, and author and editor conflicts of interest policies. Excellent. Okay, this is a good time to stop for questions. Brittany, have we had any questions come in that we can answer?
We've had one question come in. It's a two-part question for Christina or Erin. How often are new journals added to NLM, and how many new titles are added in a year?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to drop a couple of links to Brittany so she can put them in the chat. PMC and Medline maintain separate selection stats for those journal processes. And so you can see how many passed the scientific quality evaluation for both. Did that answer both parts of the question? For some reason, the chat is very slow for me.
How many new titles added in a year, and how often?
Catherine, I think, is going to touch a little bit on the frequency here in a little bit, but if not, it looks so the Medline process occurs 3 times a year. So those are added in groups after each meeting, and Catherine will talk about that in a bit. And then the PMC process for scientific evaluation is conducted on a rolling basis. And so the titles that are selected for PMC are added throughout the year. I'll drop those URLs over to Brittany here.
Great, thank you. And we have another question for either, let's say, Lauren or Christina. If we find a journal article in PubMed that is from a journal that Cabell's has identified as predatory, should we contact someone at NLM?
Sure, I can take that question. So if you have concerns about a journal or an article that's in PubMed, you're always welcome to write to the NLM help desk and they can sort of transfer your concern to whichever database is most appropriate. So don't feel, don't hesitate to send in concerns if you find them. It's helpful to be, as specific as possible, but that's all I'll say in terms of how much detail to provide.
Thank you, Christina. And that looks like all the questions we have for now.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Great questions. And yes, I will touch more on the frequency of review and how often journals are accepted to the various databases later. So thank you. Keep putting your questions in the chat, and we will pause in a little bit for another Q&A portion. All right. So now let's focus on the journal content that comes to PubMed from Medline and PubMed Central, PMC. All of the selection criteria and processes described up to this point apply to journals selected for both Medline and PMC. Medline is the largest component of PubMed. It currently contains more than 31 million citations from more than 5,200 journals published worldwide. PMC full-text journals, which number over 3,200, account for more than 8 million citations in PubMed. First, a little bit of background about these two products. Medline started in 1879 as a print bibliographic index of medical articles called Index Medicus. This was a physical index with copies found most often in research and medical libraries. It then evolved to take on several other formats and names, including via CD-ROM in 1971. In 1997, PubMed was created as a way to access Medline through the internet. And now we'll review PMC's development. It was established in 2000 at the beginning of the open access movement. At that time, PMC was exclusively an online archive of journal content. A journal was required to supply their complete contents to PMC. In 2005, the NIH began encouraging, though not yet requiring, researchers to submit their articles to PMC to give the public access. This was when PMC took on a second role as a repository for peer-reviewed, funded research results and introduced author manuscripts into the collection. Since that time, public access has continued to evolve, first becoming mandatory at NIH in 2008, and then in 2013 expanding to cover all of the large research funders in the US government. As I mentioned earlier, it expanded again in August 2022, and all federal agencies must make taxpayer-funded publications and research available by the end of 2025. I want to note here that later this month, PMC is debuting a new article display and journal list view. Looks really good. You can see a preview of it and read more about that change from the link on your handout if you're interested in that. So at this point, you might be asking, why does NLM have two separate journal databases? Medline and PMC have distinct purposes and characteristics, some of which are shown here on this table. Both databases primarily contain peer-reviewed journal literature, and their citations are searchable in PubMed. However, only Medline citations in PubMed are indexed with NLM's medical subject headings, or MeSH terms. PMC contains the full text of the article in fulfillment of its dual role as an archive, whereas Medline only contains citation data, which is information such as abstracts, titles, and other metadata. Both databases are part of the NLM collection, and for that reason, journals in both must meet the requirements of the NLM collection that we covered in previous slides, and that includes having a biomedical focus. As you just saw on the timelines, Medline is a much older database, and for this reason, it makes up the majority of content in PubMed. And finally, both databases have rigorous scientific evaluation processes. In the next part of this presentation, I'll explain these two journal selection processes, highlighting where they overlap and where they diverge. These are the steps for a journal to be included in Medline or PMC. First, a publisher or journal must submit an application. Then NLM staff complete an initial application screening. Next, journals are reviewed for their scientific quality. And finally, a publisher completes a technical requirements check. So let's begin with the initial application screening. This slide compares and contrasts the initial application screening requirements for Medline and PMC. Medline journals are required to have a minimum of 40 peer-reviewed articles, and PMC is required to have 25. Medline requires English titles and abstracts, while PMC accepts full-text English and Spanish articles. Both should be able to provide electronic access according to NLM's electronic access policy, unless the journal is print only. And finally, Medline requires that journals have been publishing a minimum of 12 months, while PMC has no minimum. The next step is the scientific quality review. This is a rigorous, multi-step process in which many factors are assessed, and it involves review of the journal content by NLM staff and external experts. So therefore, the answer to number 6 on your handout is true. It is true that Medline and PMC journal applications undergo a scientific quality review by NLM staff and external experts. Let's review who our external experts are. For Medline, this review is done by the Literature Selection Technical Review Committee, or LISTRIC. LISTRIC has 15 members, including medical librarians and scientists, and it meets 3 times a year. On average, Medline reviews 300 applications per year. PMC's review is completed by 2 expert consultants, including a medical librarian and a scientist. Many of them are former LISTRIC members. On average, PMC reviews 500 applications per year. The LISTRIC and our PMC expert consultants make recommendations to the NLM, and then the NLM makes the final decision about a journal. Next, we'll review criteria that Medline and PMC staff and our external experts use to evaluate the scientific rigor of a journal. NLM views each journal comprehensively, and this slide outlines some of the criteria that we use during that review. First, NLM uses the definition of scientific rigor provided by the NIH Office of Extramural Research, which defines scientific rigor as the strict application of the scientific method to ensure robust and unbiased experimental design, methodology, analysis, interpretation, and reporting of results. This includes full transparency in reporting experimental details so that others may reproduce and extend the findings. Editorial quality is also considered for both databases, and that includes factors like writing clarity and figure or table quality. Additionally, we look for detailed policies and evidence that the ethics policy is being enforced. Medline goes beyond scientific rigor to also consider things like significance and novelty of the research, its website functionality, and journal impact, which is based on internal criteria and not an impact factor. And in fact, NLM does not consider metrics from other organizations, such as impact factor or citation metrics or status and other indexes when evaluating a journal. If the journal passes the scientific quality review for Medline or PMC, then it goes on to the final step of ensuring it meets all the technical requirements. Journals and publishers upload their own content to Medline and PMC. This process is more advanced and time-consuming for PMC as they must provide the full text content, all images, and any supplemental materials. Whereas Medline journals only have to provide citation data, and they have the option to provide conflict of interest statements. Medline also has archiving requirements for electronic journals. These journals must be archived in an acceptable repository to ensure long-term preservation and access to the content. At present, the acceptable repositories are CLOCKS, Portico, and PMC. At NLM, we do realize that a publisher's business practices or a journal's policies may change over time. If a journal undergoes significant changes, the NLM may reevaluate it for continued collection. These include significant changes to the journal's editorial board, its aims and scope, its publisher, or its scientific or editorial quality. If an issue is found, NLM may reevaluate the journal to ensure that it continues to meet the scientific quality standards for PMC or Medline. The reevaluation process will largely look the same as the journal selection process for new titles. If the publisher is no longer meeting best practices, then we may decide to not collect titles from the publisher going forward. But it is important to note that if a decision is made to no longer collect a title in Medline or PMC, the records already publicly available will remain publicly available for archival purposes. Okay, so that is the Medline and PMC journal selection processes. So how do we find what journals are in Medline and what journals are in PMC? We're going to complete a couple of exercises together to find out. We'll start with Medline journals. And this exercise is also on the handout as question number 7, if you want to follow along there. So my question for you is, what NLM catalog search string retrieves records for all journals currently indexed in Medline? And the steps on this slide walk you through one fast way to do this. First, open up any web browser and search for NLM catalog. Once you're in the catalog, under the NLM Catalog Tools menu, select the Journals in the NCBI Databases link. And then on that page, click Journals Currently Indexed in Medline, located below the search bar. And then take a look in the search bar and you'll see a search string that appears, and that's the answer we're looking for. So once you've got that, give me a thumbs up, and then we'll review together. Already seeing a lot of thumbs. Y'all are quick. I'll give everybody a little bit more time. Great. Okay, looks like a lot of us have gotten it, which is excellent. Let's review together what you should be seeing. So to find a list of all journals currently indexed in Medline, go to the NLM catalog and search using the search string currently indexed. Alternatively, you can use the filter on the sidebar that says journals currently indexed in Medline. So you've got two options there. All right, now let's look at finding the list of journals currently being added to PubMed Central. And this is number 8 on your handout. So this time, my question is, what NLM catalog filter limits your search to the journals currently being added to PubMed Central PMC? And I'll give you a hint. In the catalog, you want to click on the Show Additional Filters button. And once you've found that, give me a thumbs up, and then we'll review together. All right, let's review together that answer. So to find a list of PubMed Central journals, click on the Show Additional Filters link from the NLM Catalog Filters menu, and then select PubMed/PMC journals and click Show. And there you will find the options to filter to PubMed Central journals or forthcoming journals. Now, after you select the PMC journals filter, you'll see a search string appear in the search details box. And we know that currently index is the search string that will pull up all Medline journals. So the journals PMC search string in that box will retrieve all PMC journals. So you can either use the filters or the search string journals PMC to limit a catalog search to PMC journals. And finally, we can combine these two search strategies to find all journals that are currently added to PubMed. And this is number 9 on your handout. So my question is, what is the search string to use in the NLM catalog to list all journals that are currently added to PubMed? So we've done 2 searches in the NLM catalog so far, currently indexed Medline journals and archive PMC journals. To find all journals currently added to PubMed, we need to combine those 2 search strings. How would you do that to create one search for all currently added PubMed journals? Let me know what you think in the chat, what that search string might look like. Excellent. I see Cindy's already got it in the chat, journals PMC or currently indexed. Yeah, or is the kicker there to make sure we're getting all of those journals pulled into our search. So let me move ahead to our next slide so you can see exactly what that looks like. So to find all journals currently being added to PubMed, we can use this search string, currently indexed or journals PMC. Currently indexed will pull in Medline journals, and journals PMC will pull in PMC journals, and then just don't forget to combine them with OR. All right, excellent. Thank you for working through building those search strings with me. It's another good time to pause for questions. Brittany, have we had any more questions come in?
I am not seeing any new questions.
Okay, great. If you do have questions, feel free to keep dropping them in the chat and we'll stop again for Q&A. Otherwise, I'm going to keep us moving along. And we are going to jump right into talking about some of the other components of PMC. So today, PMC contains more than 10 million publicly accessible articles. We already discussed the over 8 million articles that are formally published in a scholarly journal that is archived in PMC and goes through the selection process we just reviewed. So next, we'll discuss 2 other components of PMC. Author manuscripts that have been peer-reviewed and accepted for publication in a journal, and preprint versions of articles that have been made public prior to peer review. We'll start with author manuscripts. Any author manuscript in PMC will have a corresponding citation in PubMed. The author manuscript is the version of a paper that has been peer-reviewed and accepted for publication by the journal. This version should include all changes made during the peer review process. Author manuscripts come from a variety of journals because of the large number of funders who have named PMC as their central repository for funded research. At this time, PMC serves as the repository for 10 U.S. federal agencies. These include the major funding agencies within the Department of Health and Human Services, like the NIH, CDC, and FDA. PMC also partners with some private funders like the Gates Foundation and the Health Research Alliance. And through Europe PMC serves as the repository for 35 European funders. It's easy to identify author manuscripts in PMC because a banner at the top explains what an author manuscript is. The paper's status as a manuscript runs along the entire page. Each manuscript includes the funding agency's logo. The citation includes the paper's manuscript status, and the DOI and a link to the published version are provided in a yellow box below the citation. You can also link from the journal title at the top to the NLM catalog to view the status of a journal. I'm going to show you how to do that now. So to navigate to the NLM catalog from a PMC record, click on the journal title in the top left and then select View an NLM Catalog from the drop-down menu. Then check the current indexing status to learn more about the indexing status and why you may be seeing this article in PubMed or PMC. And please take note of how to do this because I'm going to ask you to find the current indexing status for a journal in just a few minutes. Okay, next, I will briefly review the preprint pilot that is making NIH-funded preprints available via PMC. Give me a thumbs up if you're familiar with preprints and what they are. I'm assuming most of you are familiar, but it's good to get a sense. Yeah, seeing lots of thumbs. That's what I figured. To make sure we are all on the same page, preprints are complete and public drafts of scientific documents that have not yet been peer-reviewed. In June 2020, the NLM launched Phase 1 of the NIH preprint pilot to focus on preprints from NIH-funded research relating to COVID-19. Phase 2 launched in January 2023 and includes any NIH-funded work. There are currently over 18,000 preprints in PMC. Because these preprints are available through PMC, then they are discoverable in PubMed. On your handout is a link to an in-depth description of this pilot at PMC if you want to read more about it. Like author manuscripts, preprints are clearly labeled in PubMed and PMC with a green label across the top of the record that includes a link to more information about the pilot. All right, and finally, let's take a look at the last source of PubMed records, the NCBI bookshelf. There are currently about 12,000 items in the NCBI bookshelf. The pie chart on this slide illustrates how many different types of documents bookshelf contains, like systematic reviews, clinical guidelines, textbooks, and reference materials. It includes works published by the World Health Organization, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, and other authoritative publishers. Content is added to bookshelf through direct deposits by participating publishers, deposits by partnering, funding, or sponsoring organizations, and conversion projects with NIH-sponsored authors and editors. Records for many items in bookshelf are included in PubMed. After a publisher submits an application to bookshelf, there are 3 review steps to include that content, and these should look pretty familiar by now. There's the initial application screening, a scientific quality review, and a technical quality review. All content in bookshelf is peer-reviewed. It all falls within the scope of the NLM Collection Development Guidelines, and it's all reviewed by NLM for scientific quality and data integrity. bookshelf content in PubMed has a bookshelf ID and is labeled with free books and documents. If you click on the bookshelf ID, it will take you to the entry in bookshelf. And that concludes the section on the NCBI bookshelf. Okay. Now that we've talked about our selection policies and procedures for various NLM products, let's review finding the indexing status for a journal in PubMed. And this is on your handout as questions number 10 and 11, if you're following along there. So if we want to find the indexing status for a journal in PubMed, does anyone remember where we should start our search? Where do we go to search first? If you remember, put it in the chat. It's okay if you don't remember. It's been a lot of information today. Yeah, Sarah's got it. The NLM catalog. Yeah, a couple people got it. Exactly. We want to start in the NLM catalog. And from there, you can answer these two questions on the screen. So first, what is the indexing status of the journal BMC Pulmonary Medicine? And then, what issues of BMC Pulmonary Medicine are in PubMed Central? And once you've found those answers, give me a thumbs up, and then we'll review together. I'm seeing a steady trickle of thumbs, but I'm going to give everybody another minute. Okay, let's look at the answers together. So in the NLM catalog, click on the title for any record to learn more about that title. Journal records contain indexing information, including the dates of inclusion for Medline, PubMed, and PubMed Central. So here's our journal, BMC Pulmonary Medicine, and it shows that it was indexed in Medline starting with Volume 5 in 2005 and available full text in PMC starting with Volume 1 in 2001. And if you want to learn more about any particular journal's participation level in PubMed Central, you can follow the link to PMC. I want to show you an example of a journal that is not currently indexed for Medline and is not in the NLM collection. So that's what we have on the screen now. Instead, this journal includes a note that citations are for articles where the manuscript was deposited in PubMed Central PMC in compliance with public access policies. Okay, great. To recap what you find in PubMed. The vast majority of citations in PubMed are from Medline journals. Medline consists of citations for journals in the biomedical and life sciences. The Medline database accounts for more than 31 million of PubMed's 37 million records. We are currently indexing more than 5,200 journals for Medline. Those citations from Medline journals are the only citations in PubMed that have our medical subject headings applied. PubMed also includes citations for full-text articles that are in PubMed Central PMC, our free full-text archive. There are currently more than 3,200 journals being added to PMC. About 1/4 of PMC journals are Medline journals. And combined, there are more than 7,700 journals that are currently being regularly added to PubMed, either through Medline or PMC or both. Author manuscripts in PMC are records for individual articles that are reporting on funded research. These articles are submitted to comply with public access policy mandates. These records are added to PubMed when the article is published. About 90% of NIH-funded author manuscripts in PMC are published in Medline journals. We're currently piloting the availability of NIH-funded preprints in PMC and therefore PubMed. And finally, there are also records for 12,000 free online technical reports systematic reviews, and other monographs in biomedicine from the NCBI bookshelf. So we reviewed how to find the indexing status of a journal and how to identify an author manuscript, a preprint, and bookshelf material in PubMed. On your handout is a handy table with search strings and filters that you can use in PubMed to view results from each of these resources. Okay, at this point, I will pause again to see if any questions have come in. Brittany, do we have any questions we can answer?
Yes, we had 2 that came in. Sarah put in the chat, one question I get often from students is, are all journals in PubMed peer-reviewed?
So I think I can take that question. So to be eligible for any of the PubMed databases that we were talking about, so NCBI Bookshelf, PMC, and Medline, the journal does have to be peer reviewed. So you can expect that the journal would be peer reviewed.
Thank you. And we have a question from Connie. If there is no further note about indexing, does that mean that the journal was removed from Medline or PMC following a quality review?
I think I can take that one too. Looking at the example that you put into the chat, Connie, that looks like a journal that's not in NLM's collection, where it says not currently indexed for Medline. So any journal that you're looking at will have an indication of the Medline indexing status. So a journal's either going to be indexed for Medline or it's not. So that's what the current indexing status is telling you. If a journal was in Medline and then indexing was discontinued for whatever reason, you would actually see the dates that correspond to the period in which the journal was indexed for Medline. So you would see not currently indexed for Medline, and then also you would have the information about the time period in which it was indexed.
I can answer the PMC part of that as well. So for a PMC title, you will see the PubMed coverage in the journal record. And then when a title is no longer a participant, that might be a number of reasons. They could have chosen to stop participating themselves, or they've ceased for whatever reason and we can't get a hold of them. There's a myriad of reasons, but there's actually a filter in the catalog called PMC inactive, and journals that are in that status have an indication in the record.
Thank you both. That looks like all the questions that we have for now.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Erin and Christina and Brittany. Great questions. Okay, let's move on to our final topic, which is discussing journal quality. I'm going to talk just briefly about guidance to help authors and researchers at your institution navigate the complex landscape of scholarly journal publishing today. We know that these issues of journal and article quality are not specific to NLM. We also know that these challenges, while daunting, are an opportunity for librarians. And in fact, in 2016, the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, issued consumer guidance about journal quality concerns, and they directed researchers to librarians. So you're the experts here. This is not just a selection issue for libraries, but also an education opportunity. Helping your researchers assess a journal's transparency, quality, and peer review process could be a very valuable asset to your institution. And this brings us to question number 12 on your handout. The FTC Consumer Guidance offers a link where researchers can report concerns about a publisher's business practices. and your handout also includes that link. If you're looking for a simple resource to share with your researchers, there is Think, Check, Submit. It's a checklist researchers can use to assess the credentials of a journal or publisher. This resource was established by organizations from different areas of the publishing ecosystem, including publishers, professional organizations, the ISSN Center, and librarian groups. And that range of knowledge is reflected in the guidance they provide in a very easy to use way. And there's a link to Think, Check, Submit on your handout. The NLM refers to specific guidelines from various organizations for assessing the quality of journals that you can also use and share with your research communities. Links to these guidelines and checklists are available on your handout. So for systematic reviews and meta-analyses, refer to the PRISMA guidelines. For case reports, review the CARE case report guidelines. For clinical trials, refer to the consort guidelines. And for animal studies, ARRIVE provides guidance. And one other resource for you is Equator. The Equator, or Enhancing the Quality and Transparency of Health Research, is an international initiative that seeks to improve the reliability and value of published health research literature by promoting transparent and accurate reporting and the wider use of robust reporting guidelines. It carries the tagline, "A one-stop shop for writing and publishing high-impact health research." It advances the work being done by individual groups over the last 15 years and is the first coordinated attempt to tackle the problems of inadequate reporting systematically on a global scale. Additionally, NLM maintains an adapted format of Equator with brief descriptions of each paper type, and you will find both of these links on your handout. So at this point, I will ask Brittany to put the link to the handout answer key in the chat. So you'll have all of the answers to those questions and all of the many useful links that I've mentioned during this session. Thank you, Brittany. Okay. One last chance for questions. Anything else come in, Brittany?
I do not see anything.
Okay, great. To summarize what we would like you to take away from today, in addition to Medline and PMC participating journals, PubMed also includes records for individual articles that are in PMC to comply with public access policies, as well as records for select content in the NCBI bookshelf and preprints of NIH-funded research from the NIH preprint pilot. Selection processes are different for different NLM products, but they all include a check for minimum requirements, a scientific quality review, and a technical review. Acceptance into the NLM collection is a prerequisite for inclusion in Medline, PubMed Central at the journal level, and Bookshelf. And a final note. These three resources are scientific literature databases offered to the public by the U.S. National Library of Medicine. Once publications are selected for inclusion in a database, NLM does not review, evaluate, or judge the quality of individual articles and relies on the scientific publishing process to identify and address problems through published comments, corrections, and retractions. The presence of any article, book, or document in these databases does not imply an endorsement of or concurrence with the contents by NLM, the National Institutes of Health, or the U.S. federal government. If you do have quality concerns about particular articles or journals in PubMed, we encourage you to contact us and to contact the editor or publisher. Librarians have an important role in educating and assisting authors and researchers in discerning high-quality publications. So please let us at NLM know how we can work together in this endeavor.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.